The Celestial Toymaker is a first Doctor story that features companions Steven and Dodo, who, upon entering a bizarre world of games run by the titular Celestial Toymaker, have to play games and win in order to escape. The story was written by Brian Hales and originally directed by Bill Sellers. I say originally directed because of something I skipped over in my Moonbase review, or at least really breezed past. And in extremely short terms. Until home video became a big thing in the 70s with the invention of VHS, there wasn't really any value placed on maintaining old copies of television shows. So as a result, lots of shows were actually deleted from the archives. Doctor Who in some ways did get off lightly during this time, because we have the telesnaps that were photos taken throughout the episode and kept by the directors so they could show their work, and those were used in reconstructions for years. But that's only half of the equation here. All we would have would be visuals if it wasn't for the fact that Doctor Who fans have always wanted to re-experience the show, and lots of kids at the time recorded their televisions when the show was on. And on one of the Lost TV documentaries, basically they released sets of the Lost recordings with narration on it, and they had documentaries, and on one of them, I honestly can't remember which one, and I'm not listening through them to find it, one of the kids basically admits he kicked his entire family out so that he could get a clean recording of the audio, which is hilarious, but that's how we ended up with clean recordings, or at least very clean recordings, of all of the episodes that are missing. The kids who recorded the episodes then eventually took those to the BBC, and they turned them into soundtracks. Those soundtracks were eventually released into box sets like this, where if you open them up, you see all of the stories in there, each one getting its own thing, like this one. Now, not all of them... Well, rather, eventually those became out of print, so a few years ago, the BBC re-released them as slim packs, and I'm very happy to have all of these, but that's how you get all the missing episodes again on CD, if you're still interested in this. But this is the one that actually contains the Celestial Toymaker on it. And each one of these sets would come with a documentary, like I said, and that's how I ended up with that knowledge, but don't want to re-listen to all 5 sets to figure out which one it was. But the BBC would take those soundtracks that were given to them by the kids and then get the original actors from the 60s to add narration for the bits that required more visuals to help complete the package and give you a soundtrack you could listen to. At the start of people actually trying to figure out how many episodes are lost, there were actually 253 episodes missing, and from that, we've actually managed to re-find the episodes throughout the world, and are down to just 97 missing episodes. But that's still a lot missing, and most of it is, and all of it is really from the 60s, which mostly falls across seasons 3 to 5, and this story falls in season 3. Now, from what was missing, a lot of it was actually partial stories, where they were just missing 1 or 2 episodes from a 4-episode serial, so the BBC would, when they made the DVDs here, would hire animators to take the unnarrated audio track that they had, and then animate using the telesnaps as a guide to make a full animation for it. And this worked really well for these partially missing stories. For a long time, it was looking like the serials that were missing every single episode, or 90% of their episodes, wouldn't get the animation treatment because that would be too much expense compared to doing just, say, half the story or 1 or 2 episodes in a 6-episode serial. But then in 2016, The Power of the Daleks came out. In fact, they later did a second animation of it. Hey, BBC! When are you going to release that in America? Never? Cool! The point is that when they started making full animations to the entire story, we start seeing them doing this more. Like with this one, where we have only one of the episodes still existing, but they went ahead and animated that episode too. We'll talk more about that when we get to the actual animation. But now, let's talk about this actual release, starting with the cover. And the cover is bad. The TARDIS in the theater is great, as is the background with the alternating colors and the spiral, but I really think they might have been able to work to find a creepier animation. It would have been hard to find a creepier animation of the Toymaker, but sure, they might have been able to do it, but he is really creepy here. And yes, he is a villain, but he doesn't really look like this. Even at the end of one of the episodes when he's looking over his toys, that's the closest it comes to him looking like this. But this feels just so much creepier. I don't like it, and it being the cover of the story just... it brings the whole cover down. I'm sorry, I don't like it. Now, I mentioned this already, but it's worth calling out directly here. This is a 1960s story that was originally filmed in black and white, and this cover is in color. Well, the reason for that is they animated it in color. Well, color and black and white. Well, actually, this release contains 5 versions of this story. First version is the entire story animated in black and white, even episode 4, which does exist. Second version is we have black and white animated with the original part 4. The third and fourth versions are telesnap reconstructions. The first one without narration by Peter Purves, and the second one with it. It's basically the soundtrack as it exists on CD, but on the Blu-ray. Except for episode 4, which isn't on there for this telesnap version. I'm guessing because the episode exists, but those are in the special features on disc 1, and episode 4 is not listed there, and there isn't a play all button, so it's kind of not really a full version of these, but this contains everything for that. But if you were to get I found the correct one again. If you get the Lost TV episodes version of this, you get all 4 episodes with narration, which this doesn't contain the one for episode 4, but you also get something else with this, which I find interesting. So a quick explanation on that is that the first and second and early second Doctor stories, well, yes, each one contained individual serials that we collect into our DVDs here. Each serial also usually would end with a teaser for the next story. So each story kind of bleeds into each other, just a tiny, tiny bit. So you usually can't really separate these stories unless you just ignore the fact that each story leads into the other. Hi, Big Finish! Good to see you here. So the CD set contains a prologue that is the ending of the previous story that contains the teaser for this story, which isn't really necessary because the animation at no point in any of its 5 versions contains that. Okay, so back to the versions that come on this set. We now go to disc 2. Yes, the first 4 versions out of 5 are on disc 1. And there's only one version on disc 2. It's wild. And disc 2 is where they put the color version of the story. Also, I like how if you look at this, inside here, I'll probably get a close-up, but it spells color with a U, because it's a British show. So I don't get why we get things like that, but if you get the collection sets, they don't use the correct season numbers. It's just annoying. Why would you do that? Why use the Britishness here and not use the long-running seasons here? It's just so weird. Why would you do that? I don't get... Now, I bring all of this up to say, the reason I said this story was originally directed by Bill Sellers is because usually with these animations, they're using the telesnaps to try and make something that is faithful very much to the spirit and what it was in the original version of the story, using the telesnaps, like I said, but they usually do change stuff, but it's usually little things here and there, just because it can be easier to do them in animation. And I'll get more into some of those changes when I talk about after I talk about the plot, but the animation itself was directed by Adam Boyes, David Devjek, and Chloe Greach. I apologize to all of them if I got your names wrong. Last note on the Blu-ray before we get into the story, this is a Blu-ray and they never released it on DVD, so I can't really get good footage of this. So I'm just going to film my television. So, sorry for the bad quality that's going to come because of this. The plot is about the TARDIS being taken by the Celestial Toymaker to his realm, and the Doctor and companions being forced to play his games, or they will become his toys. And it's implied that the opponents they go against are people who lost their own games against the Toymaker. At least, that's how I read it. And that's the plot, really. It's a really simple story. The only weird bit about this story, structurally speaking, is that when this story was originally made, William Hartnell's illness had gotten to the point where, just to make it easier on production, they kind of relegated him to a side plot. So he's not part of the main games that are the main plot. He gets his own game that carries through all 4 episodes, and Steven and Dodo play games that only last 1 episode each, so they play 4 games while he plays 1. And it does work, it's just, it's a thing with the story. Episode 1 features an introduction to the structure of the story and the first game. Episode 4 starts with the last game and ends with the defeat of the Toymaker. Episodes 2 and 3 are just games. But throughout the story, there's a decent amount of character work being done that really helps draw emphasis to Steven and Dodo's characters. Yes, Dodo, in comparison to Steven, is a bit thin over the course of her time on the show, but there still is a personality there, and especially in this story, you can see her as the youthful, hopeful, naive one, and you see Steven as the cynical one, and it makes for a really good dynamic as they compete in these games where Dodo is a lot more trusting of their competitors and Steven isn't. He's much quicker to see them as playing dirty to win, especially after what happens in the first game. Now let's talk about those games. In the first one, which is Blind Man's Buff, you see multiple forms of technically not cheating by their opponent, Joey the Clown, who is moving things while Steven is blindfolded. But then we get blatant cheating when Dodo finds Joey's mask and finds that it's a see-through mask, so they play the game again and Joey falls and they lose, game over. Game 2 is a logic puzzle that tells you, okay, here's 7 chairs, 6 of these will kill you, 1 will let you win, and that can be a fun game to do in person, but it's not especially fun to watch, especially when the episode doesn't show you all the chairs super clearly. So the puzzle does tell you which chair is safe, but Steven and Dodo don't even try to solve the logic. They just find dolls they can set on each of the chairs, and set them on there to let the doll take the brunt of the pain. The other thing with this is, you can logic this alone. You don't really need a competitor. I guess it's a race, technically, but I don't get why they have competitors for this. But I do love the competitors. They are playing cards. And in the animation, they're handled extremely well. They look so good. If you look at the original telesnaps, there's a decent effort for the playing card there, but the animation just works so much better. I'll talk about this more, but it is elevating the material super well. On to the third game, which is, it's just a hunt around a room to find a key. And there are technically, competitors? I put that in the biggest quotes because they're more social obstacles meant to slow them down from finding it, which, I mean, why couldn't you find 4 interesting games to do? Like, oh my word, it's so boring. And I just talked about how the previous game was, like, it not the most filmable, but at least you were dropping dolls on stuff and they were electrocuted or frozen or whatever, but this? Anyway, that's only half the episode. Like, that game is so bad, it only takes up half the episode. And the other half of the episode, we'll talk about later. The fourth game is my favorite game, TARDIS Hopscotch. It features a particularly nasty villain that is just the most vile, punchable, awful person. I hate this guy. Now, even in the original version of this episode, this character is fat. He is a fat, mean child played by an adult, but the animation leans more into the fatness of him. And I guess maybe he looks more like a toy that I can see existing in the 60s, but I did need to just acknowledge that this is, yes, a bit fat-phobic. But the character's personality, he's genuinely awful. He is the personification of a spoiled child that you just know has parents that are the type to go to the teacher to go, "Why didn't he get 100%? You're making him feel bad. Why would you do that?" But I do genuinely enjoy him as a character. He's an excellent villain for this story and is clearly the Toymaker's favorite person to compete for him because he's exactly the type of person the Toymaker is. Petty and vengeful to win. It's great. And the way he plays this game, by only explaining rules as they become beneficial to him, it's really great. It fits well with this personality of child, and I'm glad that if they had to keep any episodes, like, if they had to choose which episode survived the archive purge, it was this one. I'll also say the way that this guy is defeated by his own cheat coming back against him just because he's so overjoyed because he has won, it fits perfectly for his personality. It's a great ending for him. Now, as I said earlier, throughout all 4 episodes, the Toymaker is making the Doctor play what they call the Trilogic game. I know this as the Towers of Hanoi, because I'm a programmer, and at some point in college you have to program the Towers of Hanoi. I'll get more into this in a minute, but I'll just say this game is more about keeping track of what you are doing rather than knowing what to do. It really makes part of the way the Toymaker is played here read really weird to me because he makes this same comment constantly throughout these scenes of saying, "Oh, we'll know soon if you've made a mistake, Doctor." And I'll just say, you know incredibly quickly when you're doing this if you've made a mistake. Like, if you make a single mistake, you know within one move if you've done it. It's not a type of thing where you find a mistake long after. Like, a little bit, but not much. Like, it's early on that you find the mistake, not at the end. And this whole thing just speaks to me of the writer didn't know how this game was played or only knew the basics of it. The real trick that the Toymaker does to make this game difficult for the Doctor is by randomly advancing the game to a different move, which is diabolical. That is virtually guaranteed to make mistakes, much more than just taunting of, "Oh, I hope you didn't make a mistake already, Doctor." It's like, jumping ahead makes it so much more confusing. Like, I don't think I could walk up to a valid state of this at a random move and know with 100% certainty which move to make. So, let's do that. Oh no! So, here's how the game works. The only thing that really matters is if there's an even number of discs or an odd number of discs. So, I'm going to demonstrate how to move 2, where this is column A, B, and C. And you need to move the whole thing from column A to column C using the rules as described, where you can only move 1 disc at a time and you can't place a larger disc on a smaller disc. So to move it over, you take disc 1, place it here, move disc 2 over, move disc 1 here. And that's how you do 2 discs. For 3 discs, what you do is you start placing it where it goes, move disc 2 here, move disc 1 back, then you move the bottom over, disc 1 goes back, disc 2 goes here, and disc 1 goes here. That's the entire thing. It's just that at various levels. It's that those sequences are repeated constantly. Based on the number of moves that the Doctor is given, 1023, he is playing 10 discs, which this is 10 discs. And that is tough, but not difficult. It's the jumping in the sequence that makes it hard. So, since we know this is 10-disc Towers of Hanoi, I'm going to start this, and we'll do a jump and see if you can guess which move is next. Now, this is an even number of discs, so we know it's like the first one where your first move has to be to column B. So I'm just going to do this, and now that I have 3 discs here, I've done that many moves, I'm going to snap my fingers and we'll see how this looks in the middle. Alright, so if we jumped to this move, where everything's kind of shuffled and you have different dimensions of discs everywhere, and you can't immediately tell, is this one bigger than this one? So the question becomes, what move do you make? Where do you place a disc and not make a mistake? Seriously, look at this. I'm holding it up and I'm probably going to zoom in later and try and recreate this for a close-up. You know, I'll go get a close-up now. Here it is. Which move do you make? If we take a look at this, actually, the correct move is this one. I know, you would never guess that, but yeah, there we go. And then you just continue onwards. See, and now these neatly stack on top of each other. So I'm well into this. I'm going to finish it, so see you in a minute. And now we see that it was nice, simple, and easy, and we have it done. That was easy. Okay, so now that I have finished this, as you can see, the meanest thing that the Celestial Toymaker could have possibly done to the Doctor was to jump the moves, and I only did that jump for you guys once. He did it multiple times, and it's impossible to guess what move, especially as you get stacks on stacks on stacks with this. It's crazy. There's definitely not a linked video in the description pointing you to the full solve of this as I ramble about all sorts of random things, my video making process, my thoughts on sports. Go watch it, please. It was a lot to do this. More than I remembered. So, anyway, the ending to this story is really fun. The Doctor is forced to reveal by the Toymaker that because the Toymaker has lost, his entire world is going to be destroyed and he'll have to make a new one. So, in order to make sure they can escape at the same time the world is destroyed, the Doctor does an impression of the Toymaker to have the last piece move on the Towers of Hanoi, or Trilogic game is what they call it. I don't know why. Maybe the Towers of Hanoi is copyrighted. Maybe I'm in trouble. I don't know. But I will say, him doing an impression of the Toymaker to make the last piece move so they can escape is a really clever way to do this, and it is believable that the Doctor can just do that. The story then ends with the Doctor eating a piece of candy from the punchable guy from the last game Steven and Dodo played, which causes his tooth to become hurt, leading us into the gunfighters, where the Doctor's fine. He's totally fine. He definitely doesn't get a old Western doctor to handle it. It's all fine. Now, something I skipped over was the fact that the Doctor spends most of the story invisible. The story starts with him invisible in the TARDIS, and the bulk of his time doing the Trilogic game is he's just a hand, and he even loses his voice. But there's a question in that. Why? Well, as I said earlier, William Hartnell's illness had gotten to the point that they had to sidestep him for most of the story. I read somewhere, and I should probably double check before I upload this, that the producers had considered replacing William Hartnell within this story. It feels like they were going to go full mind robber on him. In the story, the mind robber, Fraser Hines, needed a week off, so they just used the fact that they're in a fictional world to find a way to replace him for 1 episode and a half-ish. And it really seems like they took the first Doctor's voice away just so that they could potentially replace him later on. As in, when the Doctor becomes visible at the end of Part 4, it's a different actor playing the same version of the Doctor. They ended up choosing to not do that, which is 100% for the better. I feel like they would have, like I said, probably replaced him with someone playing the same version of the Doctor, But by doing it later, by replacing him during the 10th planet, meant the show had the longevity that it absolutely would not have had if they just swapped out the actor here. So I am glad they chose not to do that here. I'll also say, William Hartnell definitely benefited from the week off. If you listen to his voice during episode 1 and compare it to how he sounds in episode 4...
Doctor, you vanished!
What? Oh, nonsense, child. Nonsense. Well, I was right.
Make the last move, Doctor.
No, not yet. Excuse me.
He sounds much more rested and relaxed and able to keep going. So at least they worked out like that for him. So that whole thing was me mostly talking about the story based on what wasn't changed for the animation. And from some glimpses online, it appears opinions are divided on this animation. And I'm here to say I'm on the side of loving it. This might genuinely be my favorite animation to a story. This isn't my favorite story of the animations, but I love the choices that were made inside of the animation. When I watch these animations, I usually will go for the version of the story that features the original episode whenever possible, because I want to experience it as much like that. But first time I watched this, I was genuinely so excited by the choices that were made that midway through episode 2, I swapped to the full animated version because, like I said, it's just so interesting and exciting. This genuinely feels like the animation team was taking the ambitions of the 1960s crew and using modern techniques to give these ideas their full due. Let's compare a scene from the 4th episode that does exist, so it's a one-to-one comparison, where we see Steven trying to get to the TARDIS.
I want to see if that's the real TARDIS or not.
Don't you like my little game?
You see the Toymaker appear, but in the animation, they do it with so much more grandeur.
I want to see if that's the real TARDIS or not.
Don't you like my little game?
It really gives the Toymaker especially his full power, and that's just what it is in a single moment. If we look at the beginning of part 1, we can see how they show the Doctor as invisible, and they gave him, outlines and, solidness in his invisibleness to show where he is, and he's all shimmery. It's really good. I love it. Well, what they likely did in the 60s was film a wall and have William Hartnell just off-screen with a microphone, probably. And that's all they could really do in the 60s. But because the animation is working to elevate the material, it works really well for this. Another bit in part 1 is you see the Toymaker giant-sized, which I'll admit does feel like it was slightly influenced from this shot in The Giggle, where they brought the Toymaker back for the 60th anniversary specials. But it also feels like what they would have wanted the Toymaker to look like in the 60s. Big and powerful and cosmic in a way that is distinctly different from the Doctor, who at this point was just an alien. They hadn't fleshed out his backstory any further than that. So showing a character as truly cosmic in the sense of changing reality and changing his own size feels like the type of thing they would have aimed for in the 60s. But my favorite part comes in episode 3. There's this bit that I think, if I'm remembering right, was just supposed to be like a forced dance across the dancing floor to get to the another TARDIS that's not an actual TARDIS that connects the different episodes. But what the animation team did with this, since there wasn't actually dialogue during the scene, it was just music. So they turned it into a surrealist sequence where there's multiple TARDISes, multiple Toymakers, and the Toymaker, drinks out of the TARDIS like it's a cup. And then you see the console appear. It's beautiful. I love it. Now, these animated adaptations, even the ones that aren't aiming to reinterpret the material like this one, but instead just portray these things directly as close as they can to what existed already, sometimes things have to be trimmed, because it would be difficult to portray them. For instance, in the Macro Terror, there's a scene that explains why Polly's hair changes from the previous story. Or in The Power of the Daleks, there's a scene where there's an animated jig, where like the Doctor just kind of plays his recorder and dances. And the special edition removes the jig. And in the Macro Terror one, they just cut the sequence and have her start the story with her haircut. It's fine. It doesn't really matter. I bring this fact up because this episode has a bit that was edited. Not because the animation wouldn't work, but instead because of history. If you don't know, the phrase eeny, meeny, miny, mo was not always using the word tiger. It was a word that rhymed with tiger, and I also have to say, this was the 1960s. Yes, they said it on camera. For the soundtrack, they have Peter Purves talk over the slur, and usually they try to avoid talking over dialogue, but the animation instead chose to remove the entire eeny, meeny, miny, mo entirely. And I've been thinking about this, and I genuinely don't know whether or not this was a good decision or not. Honestly, it might have been better to put a Warner Brothers style warning where they say, this is bad, we shouldn't hide that this was once considered normal. Cutting it would be the same as pretending this wasn't normal when it was made. But also, I do sort of understand the idea of this is technically a new product. This is meant to be viewed by everyone, including children. And it's only 1 second, so cut it. But again, it does feel a little like pretending it wasn't there. Speaking along the lines of racial issues, I've been avoiding this long enough. Let's talk about the Toymaker's clothes. It's not great. I'll say, looking at it, it does feel like it's like this cosmic entity just chose something random to wear, but it's still a white guy in Chinese clothes. I think it's Chinese. I don't know. I couldn't find it when searching earlier. But at least he's not in yellow face. So it is just a white guy wearing a costume. I'll say this, it's not the worst bit of racism. Using the slur is absolutely the worst part. Okay, back to the versions that exist on this. Something I really like about the black and white version of it is that it is presented in the original aspect ratio of 4:3. It's meant to look as close to the classic era in terms of aesthetics. Not necessarily its contents, but the type of world it is. But since the color version isn't meant to emulate the classic era, they did it in 16:9, which does work really well for the color version. But let's talk about the color version a minute. I don't like it. I get it, but I don't like it. The colors are often bad. The black and white of the original, or at least the black and white version of it, it adds a layer of atmosphere that is removed when you add color to this. And in several scenes, it feels like there's just color for the sake of color, because otherwise it would still be in black and white. While I'm talking about color, I'm going to take part in an argument that Doctor Who fans have had for a while that I am on the losing side of, but I don't care because I think I'm right. Whenever you are filming something in black and white, sometimes you want it to look a certain way that you know it to be in color, but for reasons of black and white film and the way it is when you actually remove color, it cares more about hues, I think, or like intensity of color rather than the color itself. So if you look at sets from the 1960s, they often look very strange. And that's because they care more about what it looks like when you get it to the black and white film than what it looks like in real life. For a great example of this, let's talk briefly about makeup, a thing I am absolutely perfect to talk about. Let's look at this thumbnail of a creator I found who's talking about black and white makeup and her recreating it. Looks weird, doesn't it? Why are her lips green? Do you really think that if they took black and white footage of anything other than Doctor Who, they would say, no, it has to be green lips. That's what they did. That's what we need to aim for. But no, they did it differently from what they implied it to be. Usually, they're implying it to be red lipstick, and red lipstick just doesn't look the way you want it to in black and white, because it's about how it's meant to look on the black and white film, not about what it looks like in real life. That video's actually pretty good. I don't know much about makeup, but it was kind of fun to see her do the makeup, so went ahead and linked that in the description. But why am I bringing up this thing about color and intent versus reality in black and white footage? Well, the TARDIS is supposed to be white inside. The fandom's insistence on making it that off-green color that the prop was, whenever you see first and second Doctor footage colorized, they make the TARDIS that weird green color. And it's not supposed to be that. It's supposed to be white. The reason they did that was because the black and white footage made it look white. When they switched to the third Doctor, they chose a white console. Why? Because that's what it's supposed to look like. And this persistent insistence on making it the weird green color will always drive me nuts. And it's that way in this color version. And the same thing, I have the exact same gripe with the Daleks of this period. The blue is just to make it look a certain way. It's not supposed to actually be blue. Everyone just needs to understand that just because in real life it's a certain color doesn't mean it's actually meant to be this color. That's how black and white footage works. So all of this to say, I hate how the TARDIS console looks here, and I hate that this toy has the blue bumps. Rant aside, this color version is clearly the version they want you to watch, since it's what on the cover and on the back. But they also do recognize that most people want the black and white version, since the first disc, which is labeled Disc 1, has the black and white version. And the color version is on Disc 2. My favorite of the 5 versions, as I said earlier, is the black and white full animated version. There's just enough added to the animation version of this that it's noticeably better than the existing episode. If you compare some scenes from episode 4 to their live-action real version, you see in the original version, there's a tendency to shoot the Toymaker and Doctor scenes from a very high angle, leaving a lot of dead space on top, and it looks really bad. So the inspired choices of the animation work really well and elevate the entire thing. In conclusion, it's a fun story. If it was just parts 1 and 4, I would love it. But it's just okay. The games themselves can be fun, and I love the world that's created here. A world of just games where reality is manipulated to allow games to be played. It's really fun, and I'm glad that this is animated. If I had just seen the original version, if it still existed, I don't think I would like this story as much, but it's very fun. For a long time, it was looking like the complete series. No, Siri. But let's talk about this No. No. Come on, you can stay. There you go.